Plus, security and defence editor Deborah Haynes joins me now from Kiev. And Deborah, how are Ukrainians feeling about the prospect of this minerals deal and having to give up resources with President Zelensky on his way to the United States later this week?
Yes, I mean, people here, they're tired. It's in the fourth year now of this full-scale war, and they're worried because they're seeing this complete change in the White House since Donald Trump returned in terms of the approach to Ukraine, the approach to Ukraine's other allies, and the increased interactions now with Russia. So that's definitely triggered huge alarm bells here in terms of what is the long-term American support going to look like. And so from the Ukrainian side, it's a country that has learnt how to survive. It is the epitome of resilience, given all that it's been through, not just in the last 3 years, but since 2014, when Russia first invaded, and then obviously look back at its whole history through the Soviet times. And so it's adapted. It's adapted in a way that to the new reality. It knows it has a transactional president now in the White House, not someone who, as Joe Biden had done, was talking all about Western values. Oh, sorry, it's an air raid siren. This happens most nights here as well. A reminder that even while Donald Trump is talking about wanting to make a ceasefire deal with Russia, Russia is still launching missiles and drones towards Ukraine. But yes, so for Ukraine, it's a transactional approach now when it comes to dealing with the White House. And so it's looked at what it does have. And yes, well, it's absolutely correct that there isn't evidence of huge amounts of rare earth here in Ukraine. As we've seen at this titanium mine that we visited just yesterday, there's clearly plenty of that. This is a huge country with a lot of natural resources, and that's what it hopes it can attract the president in with. But the big problem, though, and the big potential friction, you've seen hostilities between the two sides over the last week, with Donald Trump calling President Zelensky a dictator. Donald Trump wants money. He wants what he calls payback. He sees Ukraine owing the US a debt. Volodymyr Zelensky sees it very differently. He does not believe his country owes America payback or debts. He's happy to have a transactional partnership with America going forward, but in return, he wants genuine, credible security guarantees.
Deborah, thank you. Deborah Haynes there live for us in Kiev. You've no doubt heard of the green card, but now Donald Trump wants to introduce a gold card. It'll give immigrants a path to American citizenship and come at the cost of $5 million. It's another sign of Trump, the transactional president. And as you're about to hear, he's pretty relaxed about who might be able to buy their way in.
We're going to be putting a price on that card of about $5 million, and that's going to give you green card privileges plus. It's going to be a route to citizenship.
A Russian oligarch be eligible for a gold card?
Yeah, possibly. Hey, I know some Russian oligarchs that are very nice people. It's possible.
So could we see more Russian oligarchs heading to America? I'm joined now by Tom Burgess, investigations correspondent at The Guardian and author of Kleptopia, How Dirty Money is Conquering the World. Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. I mean, first of all, is this a serious policy in the first outset, $5 million for American citizenship?
Yeah, well, there are schemes like this that exist around the world. I think that I think Trump could absolutely do it. The one in the UK was recently scrapped, and a very sensible MP described it as a gold-plated invite to launder money, which is what it had been for Russians and others. And I think what you see with Trump's comments about this whole policy and that really telling remark about Russian oligarchs is what he's all about, which is ripping down the checks and balances on the rich being able to use their wealth to turn it into power, buying things others can't get, and at the same time removing restrictions on politicians, people with power like himself, being able to feather their own nest from those positions.
What is Donald Trump's history with Russia and Russians before he was even president as a businessman?
Well, it begins with his history as a failed businessman, which, lest we forget, is what he is. He's a guy who inherited a property fortune in New York and then squandered it through a series of errors and bankruptcies. And it just so happened that he was rescued by two things happening at the same time, one of which came out of Russia. The first was the beginning of reality TV. So Donald Trump, showman, narcissist, was perfectly well placed to pretend to be a successful businessman in The Apprentice, in the reality TV, create an image of the businessman that could be sold. At the same time, after the Cold War, Russia, especially in the other post-Soviet republics of the former Soviet Union, were being looted by what we now call oligarchs, kleptocrats, their cronies. And having stolen enormous amounts of money or otherwise siphoned it off, they wanted somewhere to park it. Where was the best place in the world? New York real estate. And where was a man who would turn a blind eye to the origins of the money that flowed into his towers, rent out his brand that he was building on reality TV? That was Donald Trump. And again, you saw money from the former Soviet Union, from the big kleptocracies of the former Soviet Union's republics, the nations that run on corruption, flowing into Trump towers in New York, in Florida, and beyond, elsewhere. You saw an attempt to build the Trump Tower in Moscow, leading to some pretty shady connections. And for many, many years, that's what sustained him. And he knows where his bread is buttered. And in office, he governs like one of those kleptocrats, where the purpose of power is to serve the powerful, not to serve those in whose name they rule. And that's why he finds such an affinity with Putin, right? A gangster president in Moscow. Their interests are their own enrichment at the expense of their people.
What does this gold card, this suggestion of this gold card, what does it tell you about Donald Trump's worldview?
It tells you quite a bit, I think. It's true that there are schemes like this all over the world, although a lot of them are being shut down or cut back because they're so open to money laundering and reputation laundering and just squirreling dirty money into safe havens. I think it tells you something about how Trump operates. You can see it in the way he's operating in Ukraine. We keep saying this is a transactional presidency. You know, you've had that term in your reports a few moments ago. But I think sometimes we confuse transactional in terms of a nation's interests and an individual's interests. What you have with Trump is someone who believes that power is for the service of those who hold it. It's not a sacred trust to be used on behalf of the people, right? Power is for the enrichment and the benefit of those who hold it. It's to keep you out of jail if you're Donald Trump or one of his allies, primarily, first and foremost, to maintain immunity from prosecution. That's why he had to get back into office. But it's also simply to enrich yourself and your allies. I mean, look at the prosecutions of those around him, like Steve Bannon after the first term. Look at what we're already seeing with Elon Musk. It's about a kind of Wolf Hall world, right? Where those in power see themselves as synonymous with the state, where the King of England would call himself England and refer to the French king as France. It's the privatization of power itself.
Just very quickly, Tom, but this is contradictory to his plan, and we know his views to close the borders.
Yeah, well, step back from it a moment, and this goes for visa sale schemes all around the world. What a strange thing it is, actually, to sell citizenship. Residency, yeah, sure, but to go beyond that, to sell citizenship, something that a lot of Trump's supporters would hold as their most dearest possession. And then to do it when you're offering such performative cruelty against those who are flinging themselves on American mercy from some of the toughest places in the world, is just grotesque.
Tom Burgess, thank you very much for speaking to us, investigations correspondent at The Guardian. Thank you. You're watching The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Still to come, more on that strange spectacle that was Donald Trump's first cabinet meeting.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you.
How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences.
How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Connor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news. It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Innes after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News. The full story first.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive. Welcome back. Donald Trump has brought together his new cabinet for the very first time. It was a chance for them to discuss policy goals, but before any of those sat around Trump got to speak, Elon Musk was given the opportunity to address the room. It's once again raised questions about the power he wields over this administration. Our US correspondent Mark Stone has this report.
The headline before the meeting began was that Elon Musk would be there.
Mr. Musk, what's your message to federal employees who you fired?
Not a cabinet member, but in every way, the world's richest man and unelected is such a central part of this presidency. And so in the end, of course, he'd be there. Inside, the critics' lines wrote themselves. He really was the shadowy figure in the corner. The black MAGA hat, his nod to his president's movement.
We've put together a great cabinet.
This first cabinet meeting delivered on everything. What he said, what they said, and what the whole thing looked like.
Thank you, God, for President Trump, Father, for appointing us.
For the first 90 minutes, it was free-flowing. The intention was accessibility, or at least the illusion of that. Because this White House is now seeking to control who can report in here. And as always, much of what the president said just wasn't true.
They spent $350 billion and Europe spent $100 billion. Now, does anybody really think that's fair? But then we find out a little while ago, not so long ago, a few months ago, I found out that the money they spent, they get back. But the money we spent, we don't get back.
He repeated the claim that America had paid more than Europe to Ukraine and that Europe's funding is a loan. But it was how he framed things that was so striking. On the EU.
The European Union's been It was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest.
On NATO.
NATO you can forget about. I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started.
His answer here was telling.
Is it also your policy that as long as you're president, China will never take Taiwan by force?
I never comment on that. I don't comment on anything because I don't want to ever put myself in that position.
And if the French president thought he'd got somewhere on Monday over the tariff issue, well, maybe not.
We have made a decision. We'll be announcing it very soon, and it'll be 25%, generally speaking, and that'll be on cars and all other things.
The optics of all this were about control and about showing a leader and subordinates in a country built on 3 equal branches of power behind a rule of law.
Is it your view of your authority that you have the power to call up any one of or all of the people seated at this table and issue orders that they're bound to follow?
Oh, yeah, they'll follow the orders, yes, they will.
No exceptions?
No exception. Well, let's see, let me think. Oh, yeah. She'll have an exception. Of course, no exceptions.
The British Prime Minister arrives here in the hours ahead, and with that cabinet room spectacle, Keir Starmer couldn't have asked for a clearer indication of what he faces here, of the type of government America now has, the type of leader Donald Trump now is. American power and its global clout consolidated in one man and his way. The jeopardy tomorrow will be the news conference. The jeopardy tomorrow will be the news conference. The jeopardy tomorrow will be the news conference. Trump and Starmer, free-flowing. Mark Stone, Sky News at the White House.
Well, David Blevins joins me now from Washington, D.C. And David, a bit of a weird spectacle of a cabinet meeting there, wasn't it?
Yes, he took us around the world in 90 minutes, from Ukraine to Iran to the Middle East, even as far as Taiwan. But I think the most astonishing thing was the degree to which members of cabinet appear to be competing for the president's attention. They lined up one by one to heap praise upon him. In fact, the president, as you heard in Mark's report, boasting that they follow his orders without exception. And we had that bizarre spectacle of Elon Musk, who's not even a member of cabinet, being invited before anyone else to address the room, to justify the drastic cuts that he's imposed across federal government, to justify the email he sent last weekend demanding that people who work for the federal government send back 5 bullet points explaining what they got done last week. And although there will be many people who are shocked by this, others who are concerned by it, even entertained by it, at the end of the day, Gillian, I think it's important to remember that this is exactly what America voted for. It voted for an end to what it perceived as the political class, for a very different style of politics. That's certainly what we got today.
Indeed. David, thank you very much. As I mentioned at the start of the programme, we are expecting Hamas to hand over the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages in return for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Well, earlier, thousands of people lined the streets in Israel for the funeral of Shiri Bibas and her 2 young sons, Ariel and Kafir. The 3 were among those kidnapped by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, but were killed in captivity in Gaza, with their bodies released last week as part of the ceasefire agreement. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, reports.
The video of a terrified Shiri Bibas clinging onto her sons as they were dragged into Gaza is one of the defining images of October the 7th and seared into the psyche of the Israeli public. Ariel was just 4 years old, Kafir only 9 months, the youngest hostage taken that day. Thousands lined the roads of southern Israel as their bodies made a final journey this morning. For Israelis, their fate symbolized the cruelty of Hamas, and their deaths are a national tragedy. Mother and boys were buried in one coffin, forever together in death. Their father, Shuri's husband Yarden, was released from Gaza at the beginning of February. Today he struggled to keep back the tears as he said goodbye to his family and asked for their forgiveness.
Ariel, I hope you're not angry with me for failing to protect you properly and for not being there for you. I hope you know I thought about you every day, every minute. I hope you're enjoying paradise. I'm sure you're making all the angels laugh with your silly jokes and impressions.
Sharon Sharabi is still waiting to bury his brother. Yossi was also taken hostage on October the 7th and was killed, quite possibly, by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. His body is still there.
I think that everyone deserves, at the very least, for their people to bring them back for a proper resting place. If not on their feet and alive, then at least, if that person lost his life, he should be brought back with dignity. He needs to be given the proper respect, to be brought back to his soil, to his land. My commitment, just as I fought for Eli, I'll fight for Yossi and for all the hostages, until the very last one.
Hamas is expected to return 4 more bodies and without ceremony. Israel will release more than 600 Palestinian prisoners in exchange. It will be the final transfer of the first phase of this ceasefire. But the hostage crisis is far from over. 59 remain in Gaza, and the ceasefire hangs precariously, with no agreement yet to extend it. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, I'm joined now by Palestinian political analyst Xavier Abu Eid. Good evening to you. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, I wonder what your thoughts are. We're just showing the footage of the funeral of Shiri Bibas and her 2 young sons and expecting the return of the bodies of 4 more Israelis this evening. What are your thoughts tonight?
Thank you, Gillian. I think the Bibas family should have never gone through this path in the end that got them. Just like 20,000 Palestinian children that have been killed in Gaza, and so far no foreign media outlet has been able to join. And of the funeral, not only because in many cases we don't have funerals, but because Israel is preventing foreign media from getting there. And also we have 665 bodies of Palestinian martyrs in Israeli custody or detention as a collective punishment to Palestinian families. I think all bodies should be returned to their families as well.
What is your hope for the ceasefire? Do you believe that it will continue to its conclusion?
Well, as Alistair was saying in his report, this is the last batch of phase 1. And I think to continue with the ceasefire deal is in the interest of everyone. However, it's clear that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not interested to get there, not just because it's about withdrawing all his occupying forces from Gaza, not just because he would have to declare the end of this war, but also because all his negotiations are based on domestic considerations. Prime Minister Netanyahu cares much more about keeping his radical finance minister, Mr. Smotrich, about returning another settler living in occupied territory like Itamar Ben-Gvir to the government, so basically going towards the far right in Israel, than having any sort of peace plan. And let's remember, that's very important to set context. The Israeli government is utterly against a 2-state solution. It's also against 1-state solution with equal rights for everyone. And therefore, what we are witnessing here, also in the occupied West Bank, are the consequences of these policies that simply want to perpetuate the denial of the Palestinian right to self-determination.
Are you categorically saying that Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want an end to the war?
I categorically say that. He's not someone who has a peace plan. He's not someone, if you go now, for example, and you ask the Israeli ambassador in London, who's a former minister of colonial settlements here in occupied Palestine, what's her peace plan? What's the position, the official position of the Israeli government? They will not be able to tell you that they believe in a 2-state solution. But here, all over historic Palestine, or Israel and Palestine, we are 200,000 Palestinian Christian and Muslims more than Israeli Jews. So if Israel is not supporting Netanyahu a two-state solution, which is what they are trying to bury every day, nor one state with equal rights for everyone, you should make your own conclusions on what their quote-unquote solution would look like.
The final stage of the ceasefire deal is the rebuilding of Gaza. Today, there was an AI-generated post put out by President Donald Trump on his Truth Social platform, looking at the future of Gaza as it might be. Have you seen those images? And if so, what did you think of them? Golden Gaza, money raining down on Elon Musk, miles of beautiful sandy beaches.
I think it's totally repugnant. It's humanizing after over 50,000 people have been killed by Israel in Gaza, including almost 20,000 or 17,000 Palestinian children. Gaza is an integral part of Palestine. It's not a real estate deal. And the fact that we are being dealt with as real estate property, it's bad news for the international community. The fact that the US president is presenting an ethnic cleansing plan as a solution, it's bad news for everyone, not just for the Palestinian people.
Xavier Abou-Eid, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian.
You're watching The World with me, Gillian Joseph. Still to come. Jeff Bezos orders a narrowing of the Washington Post opinion pages. We'll hear from a long-time editor of the newspaper.
I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free
wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Welcome back. You remember the Amazon boss, Jeff Bezos, was one of a number of tech bosses sat front and centre at Donald Trump's inauguration. It was a sign of how America's richest people are growing closer to the president. Well, today, Mr. Bezos, who also owns The Washington Post, directed staff on its opinion pages to promote personal liberties and free markets, appearing to align the paper with the political right. Well, in a memo to staff, he said, "We are going to be writing every day in support and defence of two pillars, personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. I'm confident that free markets and personal liberties are right for America. I also believe these viewpoints are underserved in the current market of ideas and news opinion. I'm excited for us together to fill that void." Well, I spoke about the shift in editorial policy with Marty Barron, who edited the paper for almost 10 years.
I was just appalled. I couldn't believe that he was doing that. I mean, Jeff Bezos has always talked about having a variety of points of view on the op-ed page and welcoming that. The direction of the newspaper most recently has been to make sure that the coverage reflects, as they put it, all of America. And this runs totally counter to that. And so I was certainly disappointed, but really disgusted.
What do you think it will mean in practical terms? What difference will people see when they buy The Washington Post now?
Well, for decades, the Post has prided itself on running a whole variety of opinions on its opinion pages. Of course, it had its editorials that reflected its overall point of view for the editorial board, but then they welcomed all sorts of other opinions. But now what he signaled is that only one sort of opinion will be reflected on those pages, and that will be the opinion that he himself holds. About economics, about personal liberties, what have you, and how he defines those terms. And look, that just totally runs counter to the history of so-called op-ed pages. The whole idea of those pages was that there would be a whole range of opinions, and then people could make up their minds. But now he's saying that only one opinion will be allowed on those pages, and that will be his opinion.
And in your view, the paper will no longer speak for all of America or to all of America?
Well, right. I mean, it never purported to speak for all of America, but it purported to offer all of America a voice on its pages. And it certainly did that. There was a wide range of opinion on the opinion pages of the Washington Post, online and print. And now what's being signaled is that really only one sort of opinion is allowed here. At the same time that he's talking about personal liberties, and he's denying people the liberty to express their opinions on a forum that is controlled by the Washington Post.
Why do you think Jeff Bezos is doing this at this particular time?
Well, look, I mean, I think there have been any number of signs that he's yielding to pressure from Donald Trump. Donald Trump is proving to be the most vengeful president we have ever seen, certainly that I've ever seen. And I think he's been fearful for a long time, dating to prior to the election last year, that Trump would make him a target, that he would deny government business to Amazon, which has a big business in cloud computing services and does a lot of business with the government. It's a big growth area for Amazon. And also he has his own private commercial space venture, Blue Origin, which just recently was able to launch a rocket into orbit and now hopes to be competing with Elon Musk on satellites and other commercial space ventures. And it will be highly dependent upon the U.S. government. And so he realizes how dependent his commercial interests are on the U.S. government. He realizes how vengeful Donald Trump is, and he's concerned about the potential consequences for his other businesses, and he's now prioritizing his other commercial interests over the interests of the Washington Post.
How far has Jeff Bezos come from when you were the editor at the newspaper? How different is it, what he's saying now in terms of ideology and ethos of the newspaper?
Well, it's completely different. All along, he defended our independence, the independence to cover things as we wished. He welcomed a wide variety of opinions on the opinion pages. He was all for that and recommended it. He resisted pressure from Donald Trump during Trump's first term. Trump threatened Amazon, threatened its cloud computing services, its postal deliveries. It threatened a Defense Department contract. All of those sorts of things, and he resisted it even to the point where Amazon sued the federal government and sought to obtain the testimony of Donald Trump. And they accused Trump of of interfering in Amazon's business and denying it government contracts solely because of the coverage of the Washington Post. Now he seems to be yielding to that pressure and doing whatever he can to get into the good graces of Donald Trump.
I'm sure as an editor of the Washington Post for some 10 years, you loved the publication. What would you say to Jeff Bezos tonight?
That he's making a big mistake, that he's betraying the core principles of the Washington Post, principles that are on the wall as you walk into the newsroom every day. I wish he would walk into that newsroom more often because he hardly ever does go into that newsroom to talk to anybody. And that this is totally counter to what he said himself when he joined the Washington Post, when he purchased the Washington Post, about the kinds of principles that he himself was going to maintain. And so I would tell him that it's not just someone like me who's disappointed and disgusted by these actions, but the entire newsroom is. I think an entire truly independent press is, and a huge portion of the American public is as well.
So Keir Starmer is on his way to the White House to meet Donald Trump. The Prime Minister will be hoping to use the trip to carve out a leadership role as the President puts the old order into flux. Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, is travelling with the Prime Minister and sent this update before boarding the flight.
I've been on a number of these visits to the White House with various PMs, but none of them are as significant or as matter as much as this one. Why? Well, quite simply, as Keir Starmer says, everything has changed. The US has been the UK's closest ally for decades, but now it is a much less reliable partner under Donald Trump. Be it on trade or security, Keir Starmer really doesn't know what he's heading into. Let's look at Ukraine quickly. Well, can Starmer get security guarantees for Ukraine from a Donald Trump that appears to be pivoting, more sympathetic to Russia than European allies? And then on trade, this is a president threatening tariffs. That would be really bad for the UK economy. And you know what Keir Starmer needs? Well, he needs growth. So on security and trade, massive arse from Keir Starmer. This is a huge test for him. Can he win?
A lot of pressure on Sir Keir Starmer. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, joins me now from Downing Street. And John, what is the state of the relationship between Starmer and Trump? And can a Labour Prime Minister get on with a Republican president?
Well, the answer to the second question is yes, absolutely, and plenty of evidence of that over the years. But as for the Starmer-Trump relationship, well, our Prime Minister has talked a number of times about how he gets on well with President Trump so far. They've had lots of phone calls. He's talked about those. They had dinner at the Trump Tower back in September. David Lammy went along to that dinner as well. Very cordial dinner, both Sir Keir and Mr. Lammy have said. Mr. Lammy famously asked for a second helping of chicken. But this is the big test, as Beth was saying. Really, it could almost be a showdown, really, because of all those differences on issues such as Ukraine, President Zelensky, tariffs, and so on. But if you look back in history, plenty of examples of a Labour Prime Minister getting on well with a Republican or a Democrat getting on well with a Conservative. If you go back to after the war, Churchill famously got on brilliantly with Harry Truman. It was at an event in Missouri that Winston Churchill first used that famous phrase, the special relationship. He also used the phrase the Iron Curtain for the first time. He got on well with the Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt in the Second World War. They both shared a passion for big cigars. But then if you go forward to the 50s, you had Anthony Eden, Conservative, and Dwight Eisenhower, Republican. They fell out badly over Suez. Then you had the rather stuffy Harold Macmillan, British Tory Prime Minister, getting on very well with the charismatic JFK in the early 60s. Cuba, big issues like that, the missile crisis. And then in the 60s, you had Harold Wilson having a big disagreement with Labour's Harold Wilson with the Democrat Lyndon Johnson over Vietnam. Johnson wanted Wilson to send British troops to Vietnam. No, said Harold Wilson. And then much more recently, you had John Major got on pretty well with Bill Clinton, the Democrat. Of course, Blair and Clinton got on very well. And of course, Thatcher and Reagan were ideological soulmates. And then more recently, David Cameron played golf with Barack Obama, the Democrat, and the Conservative Prime Minister. So there are plenty of examples. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be a Labour Prime Minister and a Democrat or a Tory and a Republican. And so what Sir Keir is really desperately hoping, and he's touching down now in about an hour and a half from now in Washington. His first port of call is going to be a briefing from Peter Mandelson, the new ambassador at the luxurious ambassador's residence in Massachusetts Avenue. But he's hoping that all the groundwork that Mr. Mandelson, Lord Mandelson's done, and so on, and all the effort that's gone into this trip will pay off, and they will hit it off.
John, thank you very much. We'll, of course, be reporting on that trip. But that is all for tonight's edition of The World. We'll be back tomorrow with more coverage of Sir Keir Starmer's trip to Washington, D.C. News at 10 is next with Anna Botting.